Let me give you detailed main point of the systematic practices that Europeans used to subjugate the Kemetic legacy by stealing and misappropriating all of Kemet's wisdom, technology, and rich history. 1. Imperialistic ideologies and oppressive practices such as beliefs in cultural superiority, Orientalism, and the divine right of conquest. Justified the exploitation and appropriation of ancient Egyptian knowledge and artifacts by European and Greek powers. 2. The systematic looting and theft of Egyptian artifacts, often under the guise of archaeological expeditions, led to the removal and displacement of significant cultural treasures to Western museums and private collections. 3. The misinterpretation and distortion of Egyptian knowledge, culture, and legacy by Greek philosophers and European scholars often framed Egyptian contributions as precursors or inferior to Western thought and civilization. 4. The display and exhibition of Egyptian artifacts in Western museums has frequently emphasized the mystique and grandeur of ancient Egypt while neglecting its historical and cultural significance. Perpetuating colonial narratives. 5. The legacy of this exploitation and distortion continues to resonate today as communities seek to reclaim and honor the rich cultural heritage of ancient Egypt, which has significantly shaped human civilization. 1. Imperialistic ideologies and oppressive practices. European powers justified their domination and appropriation of Egyptian culture through beliefs in their own cultural and racial superiority, as well as the notion of a divine right to conquer and civilize other lands. This mindset led to the devaluation and exoticization of Egyptian civilization. 2. Systematic looting and theft. Significant Egyptian artifacts such as the Rosetta Stone were seized and removed from their context, often under the guise of archaeological expeditions during the 19th and 20th centuries. This widespread looting enriched Western museums and private collections at the expense of Egypt's cultural heritage. 3. Misinterpretation and distortion of Egyptian knowledge. Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle drew heavily on Egyptian thought, but often presented it through a lens that emphasized Greek superiority and downplayed the unique achievements of ancient Egyptian civilization. This resulted in a historical narrative that framed Egyptian knowledge as a precursor to Greek thought. 4. Problematic exhibition practices. The display of Egyptian artifacts in Western museums has frequently focused on the grandeur and mystery of ancient Egypt, while neglecting the cultural significance and historical context of these artifacts for the Egyptian people. This perpetuates colonial narratives and contributes to the ongoing alienation of Egyptian heritage. 5. Lasting legacy and reclamation efforts. The consequences of this exploitation and distortion are still felt today, as communities work to reclaim the rich cultural legacy of ancient Egypt and challenge the Eurocentric perspectives that have dominated scholarship and cultural discourse. The movement to repatriate looted artifacts is part of a broader effort to restore narratives, identities, and a sense of pride in Egypt's profound impact on human civilization. 1. Imperialistic ideologies and oppressive practices. The belief in European cultural superiority led to the devaluation and dismissal of ancient Egyptian achievements, which were seen as primitive or inferior. The concept of Orientalism described how Western powers constructed a distorted, exotic view of Eastern cultures like Egypt to justify imperial control and domination. The idea of a divine right of conquest rationalized the violent subjugation of indigenous Egyptian populations and the suppression of their cultural practices. 2. Systematic looting and theft. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in the late 18th century was a significant instance of artifact collection, with many treasures like the Rosetta Stone taken back to France. During the 19th century, British imperial expansion in Egypt led to the large-scale removal of statues, reliefs, and other artifacts, which ended up in the British Museum and other institutions. This looting was often carried out under the guise of archaeological expeditions, further obscuring the exploitative nature of these practices. 3. Misinterpretation and distortion of Egyptian knowledge. Greek philosophers acknowledged Egyptian contributions to fields like philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, but often framed them as precursors to Greek thought rather than equally significant intellectual traditions. This Eurocentrism resulted in a historical narrative that diminished the unique achievements and continuity of ancient Egyptian civilization. 4. Problematic exhibition practices. Museum displays of Egyptian artifacts have frequently emphasized the exotic, mysterious nature of ancient Egypt, while neglecting the cultural context and significance of these objects for the Egyptian people. This approach not only perpetuates colonial narratives, but also contributes to the ongoing alienation of Egyptian heritage from its rightful cultural and historical context. 5. Lasting legacy and reclamation efforts. The marginalization of African and Egyptian heritage in historical accounts has had lasting implications for people of African descent, who continue to grapple with the effects of this distorted narrative. Ongoing efforts to repatriate looted artifacts and reclaim the narratives, identities, and sense of pride in ancient Egyptian civilization are crucial for fostering a more equitable appreciation of its profound impact on global culture and knowledge. Imperialistic ideologies and oppressive practices. The belief in European cultural and racial superiority was a driving force behind the exploitation of ancient Egypt. This ethnocentric perspective justified the appropriation of Egyptian knowledge and artifacts, which were seen as inferior or primitive. The concept of Orientalism described how Western powers constructed a romanticized, exoticized, and distorted view of Eastern cultures like Egypt, portraying them as mysterious and backward. This served to legitimize imperial control and domination. The ideology of the divine right of conquest rationalized the military campaigns and violent subjugation of indigenous Egyptian populations. As European powers believed they had a God-given mandate to civilize and Christianize other lands. 2. Systematic looting and theft. Napoleon's Egyptian expedition in the late 18th century was a major turning point as his forces engaged in widespread artifact collection, including the seizure of the Rosetta Stone, a crucial key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics. During the 19th century, British imperial expansion in Egypt led to the large-scale removal of significant cultural artifacts, such as statues, reliefs, and other treasures, which were transported to the British Museum and other institutions without the consent of the Egyptian people. This systematic looting was often carried out under the guise of archaeological expeditions. Nature of these practices and the disregard for the cultural significance of the artifacts. 3. Misinterpretation and distortion of Egyptian knowledge. Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle acknowledged the contributions of ancient Egyptian thought to fields like philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. However, they often presented these ideas through a lens that emphasized Greek superiority and diminished the unique achievements of the Egyptian intellectual tradition. Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle acknowledged the contributions of ancient Egyptian thought to fields like philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. However, they often presented these ideas through a lens that emphasized Greek superiority and diminished the unique achievements of the Egyptian intellectual tradition. This Eurocentrism resulted in a historical narrative that framed Egyptian knowledge as a mere precursor or foundation for Greek thought. rather than recognizing it as an equally significant and sophisticated intellectual tradition. 4. Problematic exhibition practices. The display of Egyptian artifacts in Western museums has frequently focused on the grandeur, mystery, and exoticism of ancient Egypt, without adequately addressing the cultural significance and historical context of these objects for the Egyptian people. This approach not only perpetuates colonial narratives that depict Egyptian civilization as a relic of the past, but also contributes to the ongoing alienation of Egyptian heritage from its rightful cultural and historical context. 5. Lasting legacy and reclamation efforts. The marginalization and distortion of African and Egyptian heritage in historical accounts has had lasting implications for people of African descent, who continue to grapple with the effects of this Eurocentric narrative. Ongoing efforts to repatriate looted artifacts and reclaim the narratives, identities, and sense of pride in ancient Egyptian civilization are crucial for fostering a more equitable and inclusive understanding of its profound impact on global culture and knowledge. This presentation has been researched, compiled, and brought to you by Sharri Plaza. Please think about and research your actual legitimate history for yourself. If you don't know anything about your true heritage, then you can't realize the path that you should diligently be trotting towards. Remember, know the self and don't rely on the deceptions and lies that have been passed down and internalized century after century, generation after generation, ancestor after ancestor.